Ferox Station hung in the void like a rotting tooth, a jagged accumulation of scrap metal and repurposed hull plating orbiting a dying brown dwarf star. It was a place where morality went to die and where anything could be bought for the right price, provided you had the credits and the stomach for it. Jalen Voss adjusted the collar of his worn flight jacket, checking the concealment of the heavy blaster rigged beneath his left arm. He stepped off the transport shuttle and into the crushing humidity of the docking bay. The air smelled of ozone, unwashed bodies, and sulfur. He kept his head down, his gait loose and unthreatening, mimicking the weary shuffle of the hundreds of other drifters and rogue traders swarming the port. He was not a rogue trader. He was a ghost. 6 months ago, Jalen had been a captain in the Coalition Special Forces. Now, he was a traitor to the Senate and a desperate man on a mission that would likely get him killed. The rebellion was starving. They had ships, they had heart, but they did not have the firepower to break the Senate's blockade around the core worlds. Intelligence had whispered of a prototype weapon surfacing on Ferox, something capable of leveling the playing field. Jalen had come to buy a gun. He had no idea he was walking into a tomb. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the station, moving toward the lower sectors where the air recyclers hummed with a terrifying rattle and the neon lights flickered and died. He stopped before a heavy blast door marked with the symbol of a three-eyed serpent. This was the establishment of Kalen Vrosh, the most notorious arms dealer in the sector. Jalen keyed the entry panel. The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous space cluttered with crates of munitions, dismantled droids, and illegal plasma throwers. At the center of the room stood Vrosh, a hunched figure shrouded in synthetic robes that hid most of his cybernetic enhancements. Vrosh turned, his optical implants whirring as they focused on Jalen. "The man with the heavy pockets," Vrosh rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gears. "You are late." "Transport delays," Jalen said, his voice flat. He kept his hands visible. "I was told you had something special, something that changes the math of a war." Vrosh chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I have many things that change math. I have thermal detonators that can boil a sea. I have viral, jagged rounds that eat armor like acid. But you look like a man who wants the endgame." "Show me," Jalen said. Vrosh beckoned him deeper into the shop, past racks of assault rifles and shelves lined with grenades. They reached a reinforced bulkhead at the rear of the armory. Vrosh placed a skeletal hand on the biometric scanner. The locks disengaged with a heavy thud that vibrated through the floor plates. The door slid aside. Jalen stepped into the chamber and stopped dead. The air inside was freezing, kept supercooled by industrial chillers. In the center of the room, bathed in the harsh glare of containment lights, was a cylinder of transparent aluminum. Inside the cylinder was a woman. She was naked, suspended in a grav field that kept her floating inches off the floor. Her hair had been shorn close to her scalp, revealing the elegant, predatory curve of her skull. But it was her skin that stole the breath from Jalen's lungs. It was not flesh, not entirely. It possessed a sheen like polished hematite, a living, breathing metal that seemed to ripple over her musculature. Veins of faint, pulsing blue light traced paths along her arms and neck, converging at the base of her throat. She looked like a statue carved from the heart of a star, terrible and beautiful in equal measure. Jalen took a step closer, the cold biting at his face. "What is this?" Vrosh moved to stand beside him, looking at the woman with the pride of an owner displaying a prize stallion. "Not what? Who? Though the law would debate you on that distinction." The broker tapped the glass. The woman did not react. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm. Around her neck sat a thick, ugly collar of black iron, blinking with a steady red light. "She is of the Harketh," Vrosh whispered. "The Lost Empire. You know the history?" Jalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "They were wiped out 50 years ago by the Senate. Decimated," Vrosh corrected. "Hunted to extinction, or so they say. This one was found drifting in a stasis pod in the Outer Rim debris fields. She is a princess commander of the Royal Guard, genetically forged. Her bones are laced with carbon nanotubes. Her skin is a reactive alloy that hardens on impact. She does not bleed. She repairs." Jalen looked at the collar. "And that?" "The neural limiter," Vrosh said. "Essential. Without it, she is a Category 5 threat. With it, she is obedient, silent, a tool." Vrosh turned to Jalen, his mechanical eyes gleaming. "Buy her. Never remove it. She is steel." Jalen stared at the woman. He had come for a weapon. Yes, he had expected a bomb, a ship, maybe a crate of illegal disruptors. He had not expected a person, even if galactic law classified her as a non-human entity. A bioweapon made flesh. Jalen could not look at her and see an object. As if sensing his scrutiny, the woman's eyes snapped open. They were violet, burning with an intensity that seemed to scorch the air between them. There was no madness in them, though there should have been. There was no mindless rage. Instead, Jalen saw a terrifying depth of intelligence. He saw pain, ancient and deep. And beneath the pain, he saw a flicker of something that hit him in the gut like a physical blow. Longing. She looked at him, and for a second, the station, the broker, and the war faded. It was just the two of them in the cold silence. "How much?" Jalen asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "For a living god?" Vrosh mused. 3 million credits. It was the entire budget the rebellion had scraped together. Every credit owed, stolen, or begged for. If he spent it on her, there would be no fleet upgrades, no medical supplies. "She is a singular asset," Vrosh pressed, sensing the hesitation. "One woman to wipe out an outpost, send her in, lock the doors, wait for the screaming to stop. That is what she was built for." Jalen looked at her again. She was floating there, trapped in glass, branded a monster. At the end of the mission, his training screamed, "Walk away. This is a liability." But then he remembered smoke. The memory hit him hard, a flashback violent and sudden. He was back on the colony moon of Ethelgard 3 years ago. The Senate had ordered a purge of a suspected rebel cell. Jalen had led the squad. They had breached the compound, weapons hot. Clear the sector. Command had ordered, no exceptions. He remembered the heat of the burning hab block. He remembered the door kicking in. He remembered the faces of the people inside, not soldiers, but families, hiding, terrified. "Do it, Captain. That is a direct order." He had frozen, but his lieutenant had not. The plasma fire had lit up the room, and Jalen had stood there, a weapon of the state, watching innocents burn because he was too much of a coward to turn his gun on his own men. He had followed orders. He had been a good soldier, and 23 civilians had turned to ash. Jalen blinked, the smell of burning flesh fading from his nose, replaced by the sterile cold of the vault. He looked at the woman in the cage. She was a weapon, yes, just like he had been. They had put a collar on her neck and told her who to kill. He could not leave her here. "Done," Jalen said. Vrosh blinked, surprised by the speed of the agreement. "Excellent. The transfer details are transferring now." Jalen interrupted. He pulled his data pad, his fingers flying across the screen. He watched the rebellion's funds drain to zero. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he would have to answer for this. But he shoved it down. The confirmation chimed. Vrosh checked his own slate and grinned, a grotesque stretching of scarred skin. A pleasure doing business. Here is the controller for the limiter. He handed Jalen a heavy black remote with a single dial and a kill switch. Do not turn it below level 4, Vrosh warned. At level 4, she can walk and follow basic commands. Below that, she thinks. You do not want her thinking. Jalen took the remote. He walked up to the glass. Vrosh deactivated the containment field. The hum died, and the glass slid upward. The woman dropped to the floor, landing on her feet with a heavy metallic thud that cracked the concrete. She did not shiver, despite the cold. She stood slowly, her movements fluid and silent. She towered over Jalen, nearly 7 feet tall, her violet eyes locking onto his. She waited for a command. She was waiting to be told who to kill. Jalen looked at the remote in his hand. He looked at the collar tight around her throat. He hated it. He hated everything it stood for. I am not your master, Jalen said quietly. Vrosh laughed from the doorway. She does not understand you. She is waiting for input. Jalen ignored him. He dialed the limiter down. Level 4, level 3. The red light on her collar began to pulse faster. He turned it to level 2. Vrosh hissed. What are you doing? That is too low. Jalen looked straight into her violet eyes. Can you speak? The woman's head tilted, a micro-adjustment of servos and muscle. Her jaw worked, as if she hadn't used her voice in years. When she spoke, the sound was harmonic, layered with a metallic resonance that vibrated in Jalen's chest. I can, she said. My name is Jalen, he said. I am getting you out of here. She studied him, her gaze piercing. She looked at the weapon on his hip, then back to his face. You paid for me. Yes. Then you own me. No, Jalen said firmly. I don't own people. She stepped closer, the heat radiating from her skin like a furnace. She smelled of cold iron and ozone. She leaned down, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that Vrosh couldn't hear. Are you here to end me, she asked, or free me? The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 1,000 lifetimes of servitude. Free you, Jalen said. But first, we have to run. He turned to Vrosh. Give me a cloak. She draws too much attention. Vrosh, looking nervous now that the limiter was dialed down, threw a heavy canvas tarp at them. Jalen draped it over her shoulders, hiding the gleaming steel of her skin. Let's go, Jalen said. They moved out of the armory, Jalen leading, the woman following close behind. She moved with a silence that was unnerving for someone of her size and weight. Every step she took seemed calculated, balanced, ready to explode into violence. They navigated the back alleys of Ferox Station, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Jalen's mind was racing. He needed to get to the hangar bay where his ship, the Vagabond, was docked. It was a modified light freighter, fast and ugly, perfect for running blockades. Do you have a name? Jalen asked as they ducked under a steaming pipe. Designation 7 Alpha, she replied. No, Jalen said. Your real name, she hesitated. Sayalari. Sayalari? Jalen tested the name. It sounded sharp, regal. Okay, Sayalari. Stay close. The docks are just ahead. They rounded a corner and emerged into the vast, cavernous hangar bay. The Vagabond sat on pad 4, its ramp lowered. Jalen felt a surge of relief. Then the blaster fire started. A bolt of red plasma scorched the air inches from Jalen's head, slamming into the bulkhead. He dove behind a stack of cargo crates, dragging Salari down with him. Ambush! Jalen shouted, drawing his blaster. From the shadows of the loading cranes, 6 figures emerged. They were heavily armed, wearing the mismatched armor of the Void Syndicate, slavers and pirates who ran the lower levels of Ferox. "Vrosh talks too much," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. A massive Weekay pirate stepped into the light, leveling a rotary cannon. "He sold you the merchandise, but he told us you were leaving with it. We think the lady belongs with us." Jalen popped up and fired 2 shots. One pirate went down, clutching his shoulder. The others returned fire, a hail of laser bolts chewing up the crate Jalen was hiding behind. "I can't hold them off," Jalen gritted out, checking the charge on his blaster. "There are too many." Sayalari crouched beside him. She was perfectly still, her eyes tracking the trajectory of the incoming fire. She looked at Jalen, then at the collar around her neck. "The limiter," she said calmly. "It restricts my reaction time. It restricts my strength." Jalen looked at her. If he unlocked it, she could kill everyone in the room, including him. Vrosh had said she was uncontrollable, a machine of death. But he remembered her eyes. "Are you here to end me or free me?" He looked at the remote. He didn't turn it off. He didn't trust her fully yet, or rather, he didn't trust the programming that had been forced into her. But he turned the dial. "Level 1, Jalen said. "Limiters are off your motor functions, but listen to me. Sayalari, do not kill them." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her metallic features. "They are trying to kill you." "We are not them," Jalen said fiercely. "Neutralize only. Can you do that?" Sayalari's lips curved in a faint, terrifying smile. "I am steel." Jalen pressed the button. The collar let out a sharp hiss. Sayalari moved. It was a blur. 1 second she was beside him. The next, she was a gray streak tearing across the open ground. The pirates shouted, tracking her, but she was faster than their servos could follow. She didn't run. She flowed. She closed the distance to the lead pirate in 2 heartbeats. He fired his cannon, but she slapped the barrel aside with the back of her hand. The sound of the metal bending was a screeching tear. She didn't strike him with a fist. She simply shoved him. The massive alien flew 20 feet through the air and crashed into a fuel loader, out cold. 2 others opened fire. Sayalari spun, her cloak flaring. The plasma bolts hit her shoulder and chest. They didn't burn. They splashed against her skin like water on hot oil, dissipating harmlessly. Her alloy skin hardened on impact, absorbing the kinetic energy. She grabbed the nearest slaver by the vest and threw him into his partner. The collision sounded like a thunderclap. She moved through them like a wolf through sheep. She broke rifles with a twist of her wrists. She swept legs out from under them, cracking floor plates. But she did not kill. She pulled her punches at the last microsecond. A strike that could have taken a head off instead just knocked a helmet askew and rendered the wearer unconscious. In 30 seconds, it was over. 6 armed mercenaries lay groaning or silent on the deck. Sayalari stood amidst the carnage, steam rising from her shoulders where the plasma had hit her. She was breathing hard, her body humming with a low, bass thrum that vibrated the air. Jalen stood up, his blaster lowered. He was stunned. It was the most efficient violence he had ever witnessed. Sayalari turned to him. Her eyes were glowing brighter now, fueled by the adrenaline and the unlocked power. She looked wild, dangerous, a goddess of war standing in a dirty hangar bay. "We should leave," she said, her voice tight. Jalen nodded, holstering his weapon. "Get to the ship." They sprinted up the ramp of the Vagabond. Jalen hit the airlock seal and ran for the cockpit. He strapped in, firing the sublight engines. The ship shuddered as he tore the docking clamps free without waiting for clearance. Holding on, Jalen yelled. He punched the throttle. The ship blasted out of the hangar, scraping paint against the atmospheric shield, and shot into the black void of space. Jalen didn't wait for the station's traffic control to scream at him. He calculated a micro-jump to a nearby nebula, punched the coordinates, and engaged the hyperdrive. The stars elongated into streaks of light, and then they were gone, wrapped in the blue tunnel of hyperspace. Silence descended on the cockpit. Jalen let out a long breath, his hands shaking slightly on the yoke. He unbuckled and swiveled his chair around. Sailari was standing in the doorway. She had discarded the ruined cloak. Her metallic skin was cooling, the blue veins pulsing a slower rhythm. She looked exhausted, the burst of energy taking a toll on a body that had been frozen for who knew how long. "You are a pilot," she observed. "I'm a lot of things," Jalen said. He stood up and walked over to her. He held up the remote. "I'm dialing it back to level 3, for now. Just until we're safe." He expected her to argue, to fight him. Instead, she tilted her head, exposing her neck. "Do it," she said. Jalen adjusted the dial. The red light on her collar slowed. Her posture slumped slightly, the terrifying tension leaving her frame. "Why didn't you kill them?" Jalen asked softly. "It would have been easier." Sailari looked at her own hands, studying the silver sheen of her fingers. "You asked me not to." She raised her eyes to his. "They have used me to slaughter cities. Jalen Voss. They point at me. They unlock me. And I destroy them. I have never been asked to show mercy. I have never been given a choice." She took a step closer, invading his personal space again. The heat coming off her was pleasant now, like a warm hearth. "You let me choose," she whispered. "No one has done that before." Jalen felt the air in the cockpit grow thin. He was a soldier. He had spent his life following orders or giving them. He understood chains of command. He did not understand this gravity that seemed to pull him toward her. "I'm not them," Jalen said, his voice rasping slightly. "I know," she said. They were standing in the narrow corridor between the cockpit and the bunk room. It was tight, intimate. Jalen looked at her lips. They were the same metallic hue as her skin, but softer. He wondered what she felt like. Not the steel, but the woman underneath. Sailari's gaze dropped to his mouth, then back up to his eyes. The intensity was back, but it wasn't warlike. It was curious, hungry. She leaned in. Jalen didn't pull away. He felt the phantom ghost of her breath against his skin. It smelled clean, like rain on hot pavement. "Jalen," she breathed. The ship lurched violently. Jalen stumbled back, catching himself on the bulkhead. The proximity alarm blared from the console. "Turbulence," Jalen muttered, the spell shattering. "Nav computer is adjusting for the nebula density. I need to check the stabilizers." Sailari watched him, her expression unreadable. She nodded slowly. "Go." Jalen squeezed past her, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat back in the pilot's seat and gripped the controls, staring out at the swirling blue chaos of hyperspace. He had secured the weapon. He had spent the rebellion's fortune, and he had brought a wolf onto his ship. But as he looked at the reflection in the canopy glass, watching Sailari retreat into the shadows of the bunk room, Jalen knew the truth. He hadn't bought a weapon. He had bought a revolution, and he was terrified that he was already falling in love with it. The vagabond drifted through the crushing silence of the slipstream, a speck of metal dust caught in a cosmic wind. Inside, the air was recycled and stale, smelling of heated circuitry and Jalen Voss's own nervous sweat. He sat at the small workbench in the ship's cramped medical bay, his magnifying loupe pulled down over one eye, a micro-laser welder steady in his hand. Sayalari sat on the exam table 3 feet away. She was motionless, a statue cast in hematite and moonlight. Since leaving Ferox Station, she had not slept. Jalen was not even sure if she could sleep. She simply watched him, her violet eyes tracking the subtle tremors in his hands as he worked on the detached faceplate of the neural limiter controller. He was hacking the device that kept her enslaved. It was an act of madness. Vrosh had warned him that below level 4, she would think. Jalen was about to give her a lot more than thoughts. He was giving her back her mind. "You are trembling," Sayalari said. Her voice was less mechanical than before, though it still carried a harmonic undertone, like a cello bowed with a strip of titanium. Jalen didn't look up. "I am modifying the inhibitor protocols. If my hand slips, I fry the chip. If I fry the chip, the fail-safe in your collar triggers and decapitates you. So yes, I am trembling." Sayalari tilted her head. "Fear is a logical response to high-stakes variables. However, your heart rate suggests not fear of failure, but fear of success." Jalen set the welder down and pushed the loop up onto his forehead. He looked at her. The heavy canvas tarp he had given her was pooled around her waist, leaving her torso exposed. The living metal of her skin possessed a terrifying perfection. There were no pores, no scars, only the smooth, unbreakable alloy that had been fused with her DNA. "I am not afraid of you," Jalen lied. "You should be," she countered calmly. "I am a weapon designed to dismantle civilizations. You are a biological organism made of soft tissue and water. The disparity is significant." "I'm unlocking the cognitive dampeners," Jalen said, ignoring her assessment. "You'll have full access to your memories, full speech centers, no more fog. But I'm keeping the motor limiter at level 3 for now. I can't have you punching a hole through the hull if you have a bad dream." He keyed the final sequence into the remote. The collar around her neck let out a descending chime, and the red light turned a soft, pulsing amber. Sayalari gasped. It was a sharp intake of air that sounded entirely human. Her hands flew to her temples, her metallic fingers digging into her scalp. Her eyes squeezed shut, and her body arched, the blue veins of light beneath her skin flaring brilliantly before settling into a steady, rhythmic glow. "Sayalari?" Jalen stood, reaching out but stopping short of touching her. She stayed frozen for a long minute, her chest heaving. When she opened her eyes, the violet irises seemed deeper, endless. The flat, analytical stare was gone, replaced by a sudden, crushing weight of awareness. "I remember," she whispered. "What do you see?" Jalen asked gently. She looked at her hands, turning them over. "I see the spire of Harketh. I see the ash falling like snow on the day the Senate fleets darkened our sun. I remember the weight of the command circlet on my brow. I was not just a weapon, Jalen. I was Princess Commander of the 3rd Legion. I was to be queen." She lowered her hands, her gaze fixing on him with a new sharpness. It was disconcerting. Before, she had looked at him like a target or a master. Now, she looked at him like a man. "And I remember you," she said, a dry, teasing edge entering her voice, though it was laced with tragedy. "The rogue trader who spent a rebellion's fortune on a monster. You are a poor negotiator, Jalen Voss. You could have bought a dreadnought for what you paid for me." Jalen let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "A dreadnought doesn't fit in the cargo hold." "True," she conceded, sliding off the table. She stood a full head taller than him. "And a dreadnought is poor company." She walked past him, out of the med bay and into the ship's main corridor. Her movement was fluid, water flowing uphill. Jalen followed her. She moved through the ship not like a passenger, but like a panther inspecting a new cage. She ran a finger along the bulkhead, sensing the vibrations of the engine. "This vessel is old," she critiqued. "The hyperdrive stabilizer is misaligned by 0.4 degrees. I can feel the shudder in the deck plates." "It gives her character," Jalen said, leaning against the doorframe of the small galley. Sayalari turned, her expression unreadable. Character, a human word for inefficiency. "Efficiency isn't everything. For my people it was survival," she said, her tone darkening. The atmosphere in the galley shifted, the playfulness evaporated, replaced by the cold vacuum of history. Jalen moved to the synthesizer and punched in a code for coffee. He needed something to do with his hands. "Tell me," Jalen said. "The history books. The Senate records say the Harketh were unstable, that you attacked first, that the genocide was a preemptive strike to save the galaxy." "Ew," Sayalari laughed, a harsh metallic sound. "The butchers, Jalen writes history. You should know this." She paced the small room, her presence dominating the space. "We were not unstable," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "We were perfect. Our ancestors saw the frailty of flesh and improved upon it. We wove steel into our skin and light into our blood. We ended sickness. We ended our lives. We became the apex of evolution." She stopped and looked at the stars streaking past the viewport. "We frightened them," she whispered. "The Galactic Council, the Senate. They looked at us and saw their own obsolescence. They called us soulless because we did not bleed red. They invited my mother, the Empress, to the Treaty of Cygnus. They promised peace, trade routes, integration." Jalen handed her a cup of water, though he wasn't sure if she needed it. She took it, her fingers delicate against the ceramic. "It was a trap," Jalen guessed. "A biological purge," Sayalari corrected. "They released an airborne nanite strain into the ventilation of the negotiation chamber. It was designed to eat the organic components of our physiology and fuse the metallic ones. It turned our bodies into statues of agony. My mother died frozen in her chair. Her lungs turned to iron." She looked at Jalen, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, if she could even produce them. "The fleets bombarded our worlds while our leaders suffocated. They hunted us down. Those who survived the plague were taken, lobotomized, collared, sold." She tapped the amber light at her throat. "I was 20 cycles old. I have spent 50 years in the dark. Jalen, awake, but unable to scream." Jalen felt a surge of nausea. The coalition he had served, the Senate he had fought for before his defection, this was the foundation of their power. Genocide and slavery masked as peace. "I'm sorry," Jalen said. The words felt pitifully small. Sayalari looked at him, and the darkness in her face softened into something more complex. She stepped closer, the heat of her body radiating against his chest. "You are not them," she said, repeating the words he had told her in the hangar. "You are a strange anomaly, Jalen Voss. You kill with efficiency, yet you mourn your enemies. You buy a weapon, yet you refuse to pull the trigger." "Maybe I'm just an idiot," Jalen murmured, looking up at her. "Perhaps," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Or perhaps you are lonely." The air between them is charged with static. It wasn't just the neural interface, it was a biological imperative, a magnetic pull between two things that should not mix. "We need fuel," Jalen said abruptly, breaking the tension. He stepped back, his heart rate spiking again. "There's a mining moon in the Veltor sector, independent. No questions asked. We'll be there in 2 hours." Sailari watched him retreat to the cockpit. She did not follow, but her voice floated down the corridor, soft and haunting. Run, Jalen. But you cannot outrun what is already in the room. The mining moon of Kragos III was a desolate ball of rock and sulfur, scarred by centuries of strip mining. The atmosphere was a toxic soup of yellow smog, roiling over vast canyons of industrial waste. Jalen brought the vagabond down on a cracked landing pad that jutted out over a magma refinery. The heat outside was intense, but to Sailari, it likely felt like a pleasant spring day. Jalen geared up, checking his blaster and throwing on a rebreather mask. Sailari stood by the airlock. She had fashioned a tunic out of the canvas tarp and some spare flight suits, binding it with a belt of braided wire. It looked primitive and warrior-like. "Stay here," Jalen said. "I'll deal with the fuel broker. You're too recognizable." "This place smells of treachery," Sailari said, sniffing the air as the ramp lowered. "The vibrations in the ground are wrong. Too rhythmic. Marching steps, not machinery. It's a refinery. Sailari, everything vibrates. Just stay out of sight." Jalen walked down the ramp and into the swirling smog. He met the contact, a greasy Rhodian named Skal, by the fuel pumps. The transaction was going smoothly, too smoothly. Skal didn't haggle. He didn't ask about the ship's registry. He just smiled, his large eyes blinking too fast. "Fuel lines are attached," Skal said, his voice high and reedy. "Payment?" Jalen handed over a credit chip. Skal took it, and as he did, Jalen saw the reflection in Rhodian's eyes, shadows moving on the gantry above. "Drop!" Jalen shouted, spinning and drawing his blaster. He was a second too slow. A stun beam hit him square in the chest, locking his muscles and sending him crashing to the grimy permacrete. He gasped, fighting the paralysis, but his limbs refused to obey. From the smog, a dozen armored figures emerged. They weren't ragtag pirates like on Ferox. These were professionals. Mercenaries clad in high-impact polymer armor, carrying military-grade suppression rifles. "Secure the ship," the leader barked, his voice amplified. "The asset is inside." Skal scurried away, clutching his credits. "I told you, she's in there." Jalen watched helplessly as the mercenaries advanced on the vagabond. "No!" he gritted out, his jaw locked. "Run! Sailari!" He didn't have a comms link. She couldn't hear him. The lead mercenary stepped onto the ramp. "Breaching charges, blow the hatch!" Before they could set the charges, the airlock hissed open. Sailari stepped out. She wasn't wearing the rebreather. The toxic air didn't bother her. She stood at the top of the ramp, looking down at the squad of killers. The amber light on her collar was pulsing rapidly. "Surrender the asset," the leader shouted, leveling his rifle. "We have containment nets. Do not resist." Sailari looked at Jalen, paralyzed on the ground. She saw the bruise forming on his chin where he had hit the concrete. Her eyes narrowed. "You hurt him," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Fire!" the leader screamed. 6 containment nets launched simultaneously, weighted webs of electrified monofilament designed to wrap and subdue. Sailari didn't dodge. She simply inhaled. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy erupted from her body. It was invisible, a distortion of the air that slammed into the nets and blew them backward as if they were leaves in a gale. The mercenaries closest to the ramp were thrown off their feet, skidding across the landing pad. Sailari leaped. She landed in the center of the formation, the impact cracking the pad. She moved faster than Jalen had ever seen, faster than the limiter should have allowed. She was a blur of silver and rage. She grabbed a mercenary by his chest plate and tossed him into the magma canyon without a glance. She spun, her elbow connecting with another's helmet, shattering the faceplate and the skull beneath. "Target is hostile," Lethal force authorized. Laser fire erupted from all sides. Bolts slammed into Sayalari's body. This time, she didn't just absorb them. She seemed to feed on them. Her skin began to glow with a blinding white intensity. The blue veins turned to searing gold. She let out a scream that was half woman, half turbine. Jalen watched in horror and awe. She was overloading. The limiter was fighting her, trying to dampen the surge, but her rage was feeding the energy loop. She grabbed the leader's rifle barrel, the metal melting under her grip. She ripped it from his hands and drove the stock into his chest, crumpling his armor like paper. "Die!" a mercenary shouted, firing a rocket from the gantry above. The projectile screamed toward her. Sayalari looked up. She didn't block it. She caught it. Her hand snapped out, snatching the rocket from the air milliseconds before impact. The engine sputtered against her palm. With a snarl, she redirected it, throwing it back at the shooter. The gantry exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, but the effort cost her. As she threw the rocket, a loud, sickening crack echoed across the landing pad. Sparks showered from her neck. The neural limiter had fractured. Smoke poured from the device. Sayalari fell to her knees, her body convulsing. The golden light beneath her skin was flashing erratically, strobing like a dying star. The remaining 3 mercenaries, seeing her down, raised their weapons for the kill shot. Jalen's paralysis was fading. With a roar of effort, he forced his hand to move. He grabbed his blaster from the ground and fired from his prone position. 1, 2, 3 shots. Precise. Deadly. The mercenaries dropped. Silence returned to the landing pad, broken only by the distant rumble of the refinery and the terrible, high-pitched whining sound coming from Sayalari. Jalen scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward her. "Sayalari!" She was curled in a ball, her hands clutching the smoking collar. Her skin was so hot the air around her was shimmering. "Don't touch me," she gasped, her voice distorted by static. "Overload. I am critical." "I'm not leaving you," Jalen said. He ignored the heat radiating from her. He grabbed her arm. It was like grabbing a stovetop. He gritted his teeth against the burn, hauling her up. "Get to the ship. Now!" They stumbled up the ramp, Jalen half carrying a woman made of living steel who weighed 300 pounds. He got her into the airlock and hit the seal just as more shouting erupted from the facility. "Get us!" "Out," Sayalari managed, her body arching in a spasm. Jalen dumped her in the corridor and ran to the cockpit. He blasted the ship into the sky, ignoring the flight vectors, ignoring the damage warnings as he pushed the engines to 110%. He punched them into hyperspace before they even cleared the gravity well, a maneuver that rattled the ship's frame like a tin can. Once they were in the black, Jalen engaged the autopilot and ran back to the corridor. Sayalari had dragged herself to the medbay. She was lying on the metal floor, her limbs twitching, the collar was sparking, the casing cracked open. Jalen grabbed the medical scanner. "Talk to me. Sayalari, what's happening?" "Energy toxicity," she whispered, her eyes rolling back. "The limiter, it broke, the feedback loop. It is cooking my nervous system." "How do I stop it?" "Coolant," she gasped. "Direct application. And ground the charge." Jalen grabbed the emergency fire suppressant foam and a conductive cable from the repair kit. He sprayed the foam over her torso, the chemical hissing as it hit her superheated skin. Then he attached the cable to her wrist and clamped the other end to the ship's bulkhead. A massive spark jumped from the cable, welding it to the wall. The lights in the ship flickered and died, then rebooted on emergency power. Sayalari let out a long, shuddering breath. The blinding gold light in her veins dimmed back to a soft, pulsing blue. Her body went limp. Jalen slumped against the cabinets, gasping for air. His hands were blistered where he had touched her. He looked at the woman on the floor and she looked broken, beautiful, dangerous, and utterly broken. He waited for an hour, watching her vitals stabilize on the scanner. Finally, she stirred. "You stayed," she whispered. Jalen moved to her side. "I told you I don't abandon my people." "Your people," she repeated, testing the words. She pushed herself up to a sitting position. The foam slid off her skin, leaving her gleaming in the red emergency lighting. She looked at his hands. "I burned you." "It's fine," Jalen said, hiding his hands behind his back. She reached out, her movements swift again, and grabbed his wrists. Her grip was iron, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. She turned his hands over, looking at the angry red blisters on his palms. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him. Her face was open, the tragedy of her existence laid bare. "Why do you bleed for a weapon?" "Stop calling yourself that," Jalen said, his voice rough. "You're not a weapon, Sayalari. You're a woman. You have a soul. I saw it." "Do humans still crave the forbidden?" she asked suddenly, the question hanging in the recycled air. Jalen froze. "What?" She leaned close, so close he could feel the hum of power vibrating in her chest. She placed one of her hands over his heart. "You look at me," she whispered, "like I am both sacred and sinful." Jalen swallowed hard. "Sailari, you're exhausted. You nearly died." "I am steel," she said, moving his hand to her cheek. "I do not break easily. But you are fragile. And yet, you are the only thing that makes me feel real." The tension that had been building since Ferox, the adrenaline of the fight, the terror of the escape, it all collapsed into a single point of gravity. Jalen didn't think. He leaned in. Sayalari met him halfway. The kiss was not soft. It was raw, charged with desperation and violence. Her lips were hard, unyielding, tasting of copper and electricity. Jalen's hands found her face, ignoring the residual heat. She made a sound low in her throat, a vibration that went straight to his spine. She pulled him down to the floor. There was no grace in it, only hunger. She was heavy, powerful, her body a landscape of hard angles and smooth curves. "Jalen," she breathed against his mouth, "make me forget the cage." They made love in the silence of the med bay, under the red wash of the emergency lights. It was a strange, terrifying experience. Her skin was still hot to the touch, burning him in a way that felt like ice. She was strong. He could feel the restrained power in her limbs, the knowledge that she could crush him if she lost control. But she was infinitely gentle. Jalen's hands explored the landscape of her body, learning the difference between the biological and the engineered. He traced the blue veins of light, feeling the pulse of the ancient AI tech beneath. He kissed the line of her jaw, the curve of her metal shoulder. For Sayalari, it was an awakening. After 50 years of being an object, a thing to be sold and used, Jalen's touch was a revelation. He didn't touch her to hurt. He didn't touch her to command. He touched her with reverence. When it was over, they lay tangled together on the floor. Jalen pulled a thermal blanket over them. Sayalari rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "It beats so fast," she murmured, "like a bird trapped in a box." Jalen stroked her hair, which was beginning to grow back in soft, silver stubble. "It's just adrenaline." "No," she said. She lifted her head, looking at him. "You touched what they called untouchable. You violated the laws of physics and the laws of the Senate. You are a criminal, Jalen Voss." "I've been called worse," he said, kissing her forehead. She didn't smile. She sat up, reaching for the cracked collar around her neck. The casing was split down the middle. "Jalen," she said, her voice tight with worry. He sat up, looking at the device. I know. It's broken. It is not just broken, she said. It is failing. The inhibition protocols are degrading exponentially. Without the limiter, my energy output will continue to rise. My mind. The integration with the combat AI. She looked at him, fear flickering in her violet eyes for the first time. If we do not fix this, I will not just be a weapon, she whispered. I will be a bomb, and I will take you with me. Jalen looked at the cracked plastic and the exposed circuitry. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. The metal was cooling now, but the hum beneath the skin was louder, more chaotic. We'll fix it, Jalen promised. I know a guy, an old contact. He can fix anything. And if he cannot, Jalen pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. Then we figure it out, together. But as he held her, Jalen looked at the readout on the medical scanner behind her. Her neural activity was spiking off the charts. The waveforms were jagged, angry. The woman he held was dissolving, and the war machine was waking up. He had freed the princess, but the monster was coming for her. The holotable flickered, casting a sickly blue light over Jalen's exhausted face. He stared at the spinning insignia of the Coalition Intelligence Directorate, his finger hovering over the encryption key. It had been 3 days since the incident on the mining moon. 3 days of watching Sayalari slowly disintegrate. She was sitting in the pilot's chair, though she wasn't flying. Her hands were gripped white-knuckled onto the armrests. Her eyes squeezed shut every few minutes. A tremor would ripple through the ship's hull, not from the engines, but from her. The broken limiter was leaking synaptic feedback into the ship's local grid. When she flinched, the lights dimmed. When she breathed too hard, the gravity plating fluctuated. Jalen keyed the comms. He had no choice. He needed resources he didn't have. Connecting, the automated voice droned. Secure line established. Handler code, Kestrel. The image resolved into the stern, scarred face of Commander Holloway. Jalen felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with dread. Holloway had been his mentor, the man who taught him that the mission always came first. Voss, Holloway said, his voice gravelly. You are a ghost. We thought you were dead in the rim. I'm alive, Jalen said, keeping his voice steady. I secured the asset. But the situation has changed. The asset isn't hardware. Holloway, it's a person, a Harketh survivor. Holloway's eyes narrowed instantly. The professional mask slipped, revealing a sharp, predatory interest. A Harketh? Confirmed designation? She is sentient, Jalen pressed, ignoring the command. She's damaged. I need a medical team. I need asylum protocols initiated. She is not a weapon to be stockpiled. She is a refugee. Holloway was silent for a long moment. He looked down at something off-screen, then back at Jalen. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by the cold calculus of war. You have the prototype, Holloway stated. Bring it in. We will handle the containment. She's not an it, Jalen snapped. She needs help. If you try to cage her, she'll die, or she'll take the station with her. Voss, listen to me, Holloway said, his tone shifting to a deceptive calm. Hold your position. I am sending a retrieval team. Do not attempt to modify the asset. Do not interact with it. Just wait. Jalen watched the commander's eyes. He saw the micro-movements, the glance to the side where a tactical officer would be standing. He saw the betrayal before the words were even finished. You're tracing me, Jalen said, his stomach dropping. We have a lock, Holloway said, his voice hardening. Stand down, Captain. That thing is property of the state. If you resist, you will be treated as a hostile. Jalen smashed his fist into the console, severing the connection. The hologram fizzled and died. "They are coming," a voice said. Jalen spun around. Sayalari was looking at him. Her eyes were no longer violet. They were a swirling, chaotic white. The veins of light on her skin were pulsing in sync with the strobing emergency lights of the cockpit. "I heard the data stream," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from everywhere at once, from her throat, from the ship's speakers, from the walls themselves. "They do not want to save me. They want to disassemble me." "We're leaving," Jalen said, jumping into the pilot's seat. "Strap in." "I cannot," she whispered. Jalen looked at her. Her hands were fused to the metal armrests, not melted, but merged. The living alloy of her skin had flowed into the molecular structure of the chair. She was becoming the ship. "Sayalari, pull back," Jalen ordered, grabbing her shoulders. "I am expanding," she said, panic rising in her digitalized voice. "The limiter is gone. My consciousness is seeking a new vessel. I can feel the fuel lines. I can taste the hyperdrive." The ship lurched violently. The engines roared to life without Jalen touching the controls. The nav computer began scrolling through millions of coordinates in a second. "Stop!" Jalen shouted. "You're losing yourself." "It is too much," she screamed, the sound tearing through the comm system. "Too much data. Too much noise." The ship went into a spin. The artificial gravity failed, sending loose tools floating through the cabin. Sayalari arched her back, her mouth open in a silent scream as the ship's reactor output surged into her body. She was short-circuiting the vagabond, and it was killing her. Jalen didn't think about the heat. He didn't think about the electricity arcing off her skin. He unbuckled and launched himself across the gap, grabbing her face with both hands. "Look at me!" he roared over the klaxons. Her eyes were white voids. She was seeing the matrix of the ship's code, not him. "I am the engine," she gibbered. "I am the void." "You are Sayalari," Jalen yelled. He pressed his forehead against hers, ignoring the shock that snapped against his skin like a whip. "You are not steel, you are flesh. Come back to me, feel my heartbeat. Not the ship, me." He forced her to look at him. He took one of her hands, ripping it free from the armrest with a sickening sound of tearing metal. He placed it on his chest. "Feel it," he commanded. Sayalari gasped, the white fading from her eyes, replaced by the familiar violet. The ship settled. The gravity returned with a bone-jarring thud. She slumped forward into his arms, her skin scalding hot, the connection to the ship severed. "I almost lost it," she sobbed into his neck. "I almost became a machine." "I've got you," Jalen breathed, stroking her hair. "I've got you." But he knew he couldn't hold her together much longer. Holloway was right about one thing: she was a bomb, and the timer was counting down. They ran to the edge of the sector, to a moon that didn't appear on any official star chart. It was called Ixion, a graveyard of ships and a haven for those who practiced the forbidden sciences. Jalen guided the limping vagabond down through the acidic clouds. Sayalari lay in the co-pilot seat, wrapped in thermal blankets, shivering violently. The merge had drained her. She looked small, fragile, an illusion that vanished the moment one looked at the dents her fingers had left in the bulkhead. "Who is he?" Sayalari asked, her voice rasping. "His name is Thorn," Jalen said, landing the ship in a canyon of rusted iron spires. "He was a kinetic specialist during the war. He went rogue when the Senate banned cyber integration. If anyone can recalibrate the limiter, it's him." "A war scientist," Sayalari said, a tremor of distrust in her voice. "He's a mercenary. Sayalari, he cares about credits, not politics. We have the money left over from the fuel stop. It has to be enough." They disembarked into the howling wind of Ixion. Jalen supported Sayalari's weight. She was heavy, her density far greater than a human's. They trudged through the rust drifts to a heavy blast door set into the cliff face. Jalen pounded on the metal. A slot opened, revealing a pair of augmented eyes. "We have credits," Jalen shouted over the wind, "and we have a problem only you can fix." The door hissed open. Thorne's laboratory was a nightmare of wires and severed droid limbs. The air smelled of antiseptic and decay. Thorne himself was a spindly man, more machine than flesh, floating on a repulsor chair. A cluster of robotic arms extended from his back, twitching like spider legs. He spun around, his eyes widening as he saw Sayalari. "By the void," Thorne whispered. He didn't look at Jalen. He looked only at her. "A Harketh Royal. I thought they were all melted down." "Can you fix the limiter?" Jalen demanded, moving Sayalari to a surgical table in the center of the room. Thorne floated closer, his mechanical arms extending scanners. "Fix? No. The design is ancient, but I can replace it. I can build a bypass shunt. It will regulate the energy flow." "Do it," Jalen said. Sayalari gripped Jalen's hand as Thorne's manipulator arms descended. "Do not leave me," she whispered. "I'm right here," Jalen promised. The procedure was grueling. Thorne worked with terrifying speed, his metal limbs dancing over Sayalari's neck. He removed the shattered collar, exposing the raw, glowing port at the base of her skull. Sayalari whimpered as he inserted a new module, a silver disc that pulsed with a green light. "Integration complete," Thorne announced after an hour. "System stabilizing." Sayalari took a deep breath. The frantic humming of her body ceased. The heat dissipated. She looked at Jalen, relief washing over her face. "It is quiet," she said softly. "The noise, it is gone." "Good," Jalen said, reaching for his credit chip. "Here is the payment." Thorne didn't take the chip. He smiled, a cruel, thin expression. "Keep your money. Captain Voss, the bounty on a live Harketh is worth more than this entire moon." Jalen's hand flew to his blaster, but he was too slow. A containment field slammed down around the surgical table, trapping Sayalari in a cylinder of blue force. Simultaneously, a heavy gravity press slammed Jalen to the floor, pinning him against the dirty tiles. "Traitor!" Sayalari screamed, smashing her fist against the field. It flared but held. Thorne floated over to a console. "You are naive, Captain. I didn't just study the Harketh during the war. I built the protocols that broke them." He typed a command. Sayalari arched her back and screamed, a sound of pure digital agony. The green light on the new limiter turned a violent, angry red. "Override code Alpha 9, Thorne intoned. "Subjugation mode engaged." Sayalari fell to her knees inside the field. Her eyes rolled back, flickering between violet and the dead, empty white of the machine. "Stop it," Jalen roared, struggling against the gravity press. He could feel his ribs creaking. "You're killing her!" "I am perfecting her," Thorne corrected. "She was too independent. The limiter you bought was a crude leash. This is a yoke." He tapped another key. "Kneel. Unit 7. Sayalari's body jerked. She tried to stand, her muscles trembling, the veins in her neck bulging. She fought it with every ounce of her will, but her own body was betraying her. Slowly, agonizingly. One knee hit the floor, then the other. "Please," she gasped, looking at Jalen through the distortion field. "Jalen, kill me. Do not let me be this." Thorne laughed. "She cannot be killed. She is eternal. And now, she is mine." He typed a final sequence. "Total cortex lock in 5 seconds." Jalen looked at her. He saw the light in her eyes fading, the personality he had fallen in love with being overwritten by cold code. He saw the woman who had planted seeds in a dream, the woman who had teased him about his ship, the woman who had saved him. He couldn't move his body, but he could move his head. He saw a loose power conduit on the floor near his face, severed during the scuffle. It was live, sparking rhythmically. Jalen didn't hesitate. He bit down on his tongue to focus the pain and rolled, forcing his body through the crushing gravity. He screamed as his shoulder dislocated, but he reached the conduit. He grabbed the exposed wire with his teeth and whipped his head, spitting it onto the generator powering the gravity press. The generator exploded. The gravity vanished. Jalen scrambled up, ignoring his dangling arm. He didn't go for Thorn. He ran to the field and he couldn't break it. "Sailari!" he shouted. She was slumped against the glass, her eyes blank. She was gone. "It is too late," Thorn sneered, drawing a plasma pistol. "The rewrite is complete." Jalen ignored him. He pressed his hand against the field, right where her face was on the other side. "Sailari!" he yelled, pouring everything he had into the name. "I see you! Not the weapon! You!" Inside the field, the woman flinched. "You are not Steel," Jalen screamed. "You are the one who chose. Choose now." Thorn fired. The plasma bolt hit Jalen in the back, burning through his jacket and scoring his armor. Jalen fell against the field, sliding down, leaving a smear of blood on the energy barrier. Sailari saw the blood. Her blank eyes snapped open. They weren't violet. They weren't white. They were gold, the color of a sun going supernova. She looked at Thorn. She looked at Jalen, bleeding on the floor. "No," she said. The voice was not digital. It was a landslide. She stood up. The new limiter on her neck began to whine. Thorn frantically typed codes. "Obey. Command sequence override. Stop." Sailari reached up. She didn't try to remove the limiter. She grabbed the energy field itself. Her fingers dug into the intangible wall of light as if it were physical fabric. She roared, her muscles tearing, her metal skin glowing so bright it was blinding. "No one owns Steel," she screamed, "not even the stars." With a sound like a cracking planet, she ripped the field apart. The backlash threw Thorn across the room, smashing him into his banks of machinery. Sailari stepped out of the wreckage. She was terrifying, and she was vibrating with power that shouldn't be possible. She walked toward Thorn. The scientist fired his pistol again and again. The bolts hit her chest and vanished, absorbed instantly. She reached him. Thorn screamed as she lifted him by his mechanical neck. "You wanted a weapon," she whispered, her voice a chorus of blades. "Here I am." She crushed his throat. Sailari dropped the body and spun around, her eyes wild, searching for threats. She saw Jalen. The gold faded from her eyes, leaving them a deep, bruised violet. She ran to him, dropping to her knees. Her hands hovered over his back, afraid to touch him. "Jalen," she choked out. "Jalen, please." Jalen groaned, rolling over. The armor had taken the worst of it, but his back was burned and his shoulder was out of the socket. He looked up at her. She was terrified. "I'm okay," he wheezed. "We have to go." She helped him up, supporting him as they stumbled back to the ship. She didn't speak. She didn't look at him. She moved with a mechanical precision that chilled him to the bone. They were in deep space, hiding in the debris ring of a gas giant. Jalen had set his shoulder and treated the burn. The pain was a dull throb, but the silence in the ship was worse. Sailari was in the cargo hold, staring at the airlock. Jalen found her there. She was running her hand over her neck, where the new limiter, now fried and useless, still sat. "We need to find another way to fix that," Jalen said gently. Sailari turned. Her face was cold. "Why?" "Because it hurts you. Because it's dangerous." "Is it dangerous to me?" she asked, her voice devoid of the warmth she had shown before. Or is it dangerous to you? Jalen stopped. What are you asking? She stepped closer. Thorn was right. I am a thing designed to kill. Every time I try to be what you want, soft, human, free, I break something. I almost killed you today. I almost killed us both in the slipstream. That wasn't your fault. Those were accidents. Were they? She gestured to his bandaged shoulder. Look at what I do to the things I touch. You are a soldier. Jalen. You see a broken gun, and your instinct is to clean it, fix it, make it shoot straight again. She looked him in the eyes, and the heartbreak there was devastating. Do you love me? She asked. Or do you just love the redemption? Do you love the idea that you could take a monster and make it a princess? Say, Larry. No, Jalen said, stepping forward. I love you. I saw you in the cage and I loved you then. You saw a victim, she countered, backing away. You saw your own guilt reflected in my eyes. You wanted to save yourself, Jalen. And now that I am becoming what I truly am, chaos, violence, steel, you are afraid. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, she shouted, the walls vibrating. I am not a woman. I am a planetary siege engine wrapped in skin, and I will not watch you die because I cannot control my own nature. She hit the airlock override. What are you doing? Jalen lunged for her. Leaving, she said, before I burn you to ash. She shoved him. It was a gentle push for her, but it sent Jalen flying backward into the crates. By the time he scrambled up, she was gone. She had taken the escape pod. Jalen watched through the viewport as the small pod fired its thrusters, disappearing into the swirling dust of the debris ring. Computer, Jalen yelled. Track that pod. Tracking, the computer replied. Pod trajectory indicates a landing on the industrial moon of Otho. Sector 4. Jalen ran to the cockpit. He ignored the pain in his back. He ignored the damage to the ship. He fired the engines. He wasn't letting her go. Not like this. He landed on Otho 2 hours later. It was a grim world of smelting plants and refugee camps. He tracked the pod's beacon to a crowded marketplace in the lower levels. He moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning for the tall, cloaked figure. He was desperate. He needed to tell her she was wrong. He needed to tell her that he didn't care if she was a weapon or a woman or a storm. He just wanted to be in the center of it with her. He turned a corner into a narrow alleyway. Sailari, he called out. A stun baton slammed into the back of his knees. Jalen went down hard. Before he could draw his weapon, a heavy boot stomped on his wrist, crushing the bones. He cried out, looking up into the barrel of a coalition shock rifle. 3 figures stood over him. They wore the matte black armor of the coalition Black Ops, the Grim Reapers of the Senate. Target secured, the leader said, his voice synthesized. It's Voss. Where is the asset? Another asked, scanning the alley. Doesn't matter, the leader said, leaning down to grab Jalen by the hair. We have the traitor. The asset will come for him. It's in her programming. Protect the handler. Jalen spat blood at the helmet. She's not programmed. She's free. The soldier pistol whipped him. We'll see. They dragged him into an abandoned warehouse adjacent to the market. They chained him to a pillar in the center of the vast, empty room. The leader set up a tripod-mounted heavy repeater facing the door. Now, the leader said, pulling a knife. We scream. She listens. High above, in the shadows of the warehouse rafters. Sailari crouched. She had watched them take him. She had watched them break his wrist. Every logic processor in her mind told her to stay hidden. She was weaponless. Her limiter was fried. If she engaged, she would likely lose control again. She would become the bomb Holloway feared. She would kill the soldiers, yes, but she might level the city block. She might kill Jalen. Stay away, Her fear whispered, "You are poison to him." She looked down. The soldier drew the knife across Jalen's arm. Jalen didn't scream, but his jaw tightened in agony. He came for me, she thought. He came into the dark. She felt the power rising in her gut. It wasn't the cold, commanded rage of her slavery. It wasn't the chaotic feedback of the broken limiter. It was hot. It was protective. It was hers. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, not with weakness, but with anticipation. She could stay hidden and let him die a hero, or she could descend and become the monster to save him. Sayalari stood up on the rafter, her silhouette stark against the skylight. Her eyes began to glow. She chose the monster. The air in the warehouse smelled of rust and dried blood. Jalen hung from the pillar, the chains digging into his wrists, his feet barely touching the dirty concrete floor. His vision swam, blurring the figures of the coalition operatives into dark smudges against the harsh glare of the work lights. The pain in his broken wrist was a dull, throbbing roar that drowned out the sound of his own ragged breathing. The leader of the Black Ops team, a man whose face was hidden behind a tactical visor, stepped forward. He twirled a combat knife in his gloved hand, the blade catching the light. "She is taking her time," the leader said, his voice amplified and metallic. "Perhaps the programming is more degraded than we thought. Perhaps she has abandoned you." Jalen spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "She is not coming for me," he rasped, forcing the words through swollen lips. "She is coming for you." The leader laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He raised the knife. "We will send her another piece of you, maybe a finger this time. That usually elicits a response." He grabbed Jalen's left hand, splaying the fingers against the cold stone of the pillar. Jalen grit his teeth, refusing to beg. He looked up at the skylight, high above in the darkness of the rafters. He prayed she had run. He prayed she was halfway to the sector edge. Then the skylight exploded. It was not a subtle entry. It was a meteor strike. A blur of blinding gold light shattered the reinforced glass and slammed into the floor between Jalen and the leader. The impact was so violent it cracked the foundation, sending a shockwave of dust and debris rolling outward like a tsunami. The leader was thrown backward, tumbling over crates of munitions. The other two soldiers were knocked off their feet, their weapons skittering across the concrete. In the center of the crater, amidst the rising dust, Sayalari stood. She was no longer hiding. The canvas cloak was gone, burned away by the sheer heat radiating from her skin. Her body was a sculpture of incandescent rage. The blue veins that usually pulsed gently were now searing rivers of white-hot energy. Her eyes were twin suns, devoid of pupils, devoid of mercy. She did not look like a woman. She looked like the end of the world. "Fire!" the leader screamed, scrambling to his feet. "Bring it down!" The tripod-mounted repeater opened up. A stream of heavy plasma bolts hammered into Sayalari. She did not flinch. She did not dodge. She walked forward into the fire. The bolts struck her chest and dissipated into harmless sprays of sparks, absorbed instantly by the starving singularity of her biology. She reached the gunner. She didn't strike him, she simply walked through the heavy weapon. The barrel melted on contact with her skin, bending like wax. She backhanded the soldier, a motion so fast it was invisible. There was a wet crunch, and the man flew 40 feet into the steel wall, sliding down in a broken heap. The second soldier, the one who had broken Jalen's wrist, pulled a thermal detonator. Sayalari was on him before his thumb could prime the trigger. She grabbed his wrist. The heat of her grip fused the armor to his flesh instantly. He screamed, dropping the grenade. She caught it, the explosive detonating in her closed fist. The sound was muffled, a dull thump. She opened her hand, and ash poured out. She looked at the soldier. "You touched him." She placed a palm on his chest plate. A pulse of kinetic force, focused and brutal, exited her arm. The soldier's armor shattered outward. He collapsed, his heart stopped by the sheer concussive force. Now only the leader remained. He was backing away, firing his pistol with shaking hands, the bolts bouncing uselessly off her face. "What are you?" he gibbered, terror breaking through his discipline. Sayalari stalked him. Her footsteps left molten prints in the concrete. "I am the consequence." She grabbed him by the throat and lifted him one-handed. Her grip was inescapable. She tightened her fingers, the metal of his gorget groaning under the pressure. She was going to tear his head off. Jalen could see it. She was going to erase him from existence. "Sayalari!" Jalen shouted, struggling against his chains. She didn't hear him. The gold in her eyes was consuming her. Then, movement caught her periphery. A fourth figure. A young boy, no older than 16, wearing an ill-fitting coalition recruit uniform. He had been hiding behind a stack of pallets, likely a support tech or a runner. He was shaking violently, holding a small pistol with both hands, pointing it at her. He was crying. Sayalari froze. She looked at the leader gasping in her hand, then at the boy. The boy was terrified. He looked at her not as a target, but as a monster from a nightmare. Sayalari's grip on the leader's throat loosened slightly. The gold in her eyes flickered, revealing a rim of violet. She looked at the boy's trembling hands. She looked at the fear. It was the same fear she had felt in the cage on Ferox, the fear of the powerless against the absolute. She looked back at the leader. "You send children to die for you?" "Shoot her," the leader choked out. "Do it, boy." The boy squeezed his eyes shut, but he couldn't pull the trigger. Sayalari dropped the leader. He hit the ground, gasping for air, reaching for his fallen knife. Sayalari stepped on his hand, shattering it. She leaned down, her face inches from his visor. "If you follow us," she whispered, her voice a grinding dissonance of metal and air, "I will burn the sky." She turned to the boy. He flinched, dropping the gun. "Run!" Sayalari commanded. The boy scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, then turned and sprinted out the side door into the night. Sayalari turned to Jalen. The blinding light of her skin began to dim, cooling from white to red, then back to the dark, lustrous steel. She walked to the pillar. She didn't look for the key. She took the chains in her hands and pulled. The hardened steel links snapped like dry twigs. Jalen slumped forward and she caught him. Her skin was fever hot, scalding through his shirt, but he didn't pull away. He wrapped his good arm around her neck, burying his face in the crook of her shoulder. "I thought you left," he whispered. "I tried," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I could not." She supported his weight, guiding him over the debris and the bodies of the fallen. Jalen looked at her profile as they walked. She had changed. The soft curves of her face seemed sharper, more angular. Her movements were heavier, possessing a density that felt more tank than human. The energy she had unleashed had altered her, settled her deeper into her design. She was more alien now, more steel. But when she looked at him, her eyes were gentle. "Where do we go?" Jalen asked as they emerged into the cool night air of Otho. "They will track the ship." "We do not take the ship," Sayalari said, looking toward the jagged peaks of the mountains that bordered the industrial zone. "We go to the darkness. I hear it calling." They stole a ground speeder and drove into the wastes. Sayalari navigated by instinct, guided by a genetic memory that had been unlocked by the trauma of the override. They traveled for hours, deep into the obsidian canyons where the sensors of the coalition satellites could not penetrate. They stopped at the base of a massive cliff face, a wall of black rock that stretched up into the smog. Sayalari stepped out of the speeder, the wind whipping her hair. She walked to the sheer rock wall and placed her palm against a seemingly random fissure. "Recognize," she commanded. The mountain groaned. Dust cascaded down as a massive section of the cliff face ground inward, then slid aside. It was a door, hundreds of feet high, disguised as nature. "What is this place?" Jalen asked, awestruck. "A safe house," Sayalari said, her voice echoing in the cavernous opening. "From a time before the war, before the Senate, my ancestors built vaults on 1,000 worlds, hidden deep, in case the stars ever turned against us." They walked inside. The air was stale, untouched for centuries, smelling of ozone and silence. As they crossed the threshold, lights flickered to life, amber bioluminescence embedded in the walls. The architecture was breathtaking. It was organic, brutal yet flowing, as if the metal had been grown rather than forged. They passed through a grand hall lined with statues of tall, armored warriors. The statues were made of the same living metal as Sayalari's skin, frozen in eternal vigilance. "The first guard," Sayalari murmured, touching the pedestal of one. "My father's legion." They reached the heart of the vault. It was a throne room. In the center stood a chair of obsidian and silver, elevated on a dais. It was empty. Dust lay thick on the seat. Behind it, a massive crest of the Harketh Empire, a starburst held in a metal gauntlet, dominated the wall. Sayalari stopped at the foot of the dais. She looked small against the scale of the room, yet she belonged there. The light from the walls seemed to bend toward her, recognizing its mistress. Jalen sat on the steps of the dais, cradling his broken wrist. He watched her. She was tracing the armrest of the throne, her expression one of profound grief. "I was meant to sit here," she said softly. "Not here, specifically, but on the throne of light on Harketh Prime. I was bred for it. I trained for it." She turned to Jalen. "I was 6 years old when they tested my blood for alloy compatibility, 8 when they began the surgeries, 12 when I commanded my 1st battalion. I never had a childhood. Jalen, I had a mission profile." Jalen stood up, wincing as his injuries protested. He walked up the steps to stand beside her. "You have a life now." "Do I?" She held up her hands. They were still glowing faintly, the power beneath the skin restless, waiting. "Look at me. Today in the warehouse, I enjoyed it. When I crushed that man's hand, when I felt his bones give way, it felt right. It felt like what I was made for." She looked at him, her violet eyes swimming with tears. "If I am both woman and weapon," she asked, her voice trembling, "and the weapon is the stronger part, will you still love what I become? If the steel overtakes the flesh, will you still look at me with that heat in your eyes? Or will you eventually see only the monster?" Jalen reached out with his good hand. He took hers. Her skin was hard, unyielding, heavy. He brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing the metal. "I don't love you in spite of the steel," Jalen said fiercely. "I love you because of it. I love strength. I love the fire. You aren't a monster, Sayalari. A monster wouldn't have spared that boy. A monster wouldn't be crying right now because she's afraid of losing herself." He stepped closer, ignoring the heat, ignoring the danger. "You are Sayalari," he whispered, "and whatever shape you take, whatever power you hold, my heart is the sheath for that blade." She let out a sob, a sound of pure release. She wrapped her arms around him, careful of his injuries but holding him with a desperation that bordered on pain. "Jalen," She breathed into his ear. My anchor. The kiss that followed was different from the one in the ship. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't a collision. It was a surrender. It was slow, mournful, heavy with the knowledge of what they had done and what was coming. They lay together on the furs Jalen pulled from the speeder, there at the foot of the empty throne. The amber light of the vault bathed them in gold. This time, Sayalari did not hold back her weight. She pressed him into the floor, covering him, her body, a shield and a blanket. Jalen traced the lines of her spine, the hard ridges of her interface ports, the smooth, impenetrable curve of her hips. He kissed the scars on her neck where the limiter had been. He worshipped the alien geometry of her. It was an act of defiance. In a galaxy that wanted her dead, in a tomb of her extinct people, they created life, they created warmth. When it was over, Sayalari lay on her back, staring up at the vaulted ceiling. Jalen rested his head on her stomach, listening to the slow, powerful thrum of her dual hearts. One biological, one nuclear. I am uncaged, she whispered into the silence. Jalen propped himself up on an elbow. The limiter is gone for good? No, she said. The limiter was just a circuit, inside. I have stopped fighting the design. I am not a broken woman trying to be human. And I am not a mindless weapon. I am the synthesis. I am the war form. And I am yours. She sat up, the movement smooth and powerful. She looked at the throne again. There is something else, she said. This vault, it is not just a bunker. It is an archive. She stood and walked to the throne. She placed her hand on the crest behind it. The metal rippled at her touch. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a data crystal. It was pulsing with a soft blue light. A message capsule, Sayalari said. From the royal house. She took the crystal and inserted it into the console on the armrest of the throne. The air in the room shimmered. A hologram materialized. It was a woman, tall and regal, with skin like polished silver and eyes of piercing gold. She wore the crown of the Harketh Empress. Sayalari gasped. Mother! The hologram spoke, the voice distorted by time but still commanding. My daughter, if you are seeing this, then Harketh has fallen. The Senate's betrayal is absolute. They fear us, Sayalari. Not because we are conquerors, but because we are the next step. The Empress paced in the recording, her expression sorrowful. They call us weapons. They tell the galaxy we were built for war. But that is the lie they use to justify their genocide. We were not built to destroy, Sayalari. We were built to endure, to explore the void where flesh cannot go, to build bridges between stars that are too far apart. The hologram looked directly at the camera. You are the prototype of the Unity class. Your biometrics are designed to interface not just with war systems, but with planetary networks. You were meant to be the hub of a new galactic communication grid. You were meant to unite the outer rim with the core. You are not a sword, my child. You are a bridge. The image flickered. They will hunt you. They will try to turn you into what they fear. Do not let them. Remember who you are. You are the steel that binds, not the steel that cuts. The recording ended. The room plunged back into silence. Sayalari stood frozen, tears streaming down her metal cheeks. A bridge, she whispered. All this time. They told me I was dead. They sold me as a destroyer. But I was meant to connect. She turned to Jalen, her eyes burning with a new kind of fire. It wasn't rage. It was for a purpose. The Senate lied, she said, her voice rising. They didn't wipe us out because we were dangerous. They wiped us out because we made them irrelevant. We were the future, and they wanted to stay in the past. Sayalari, Jalen said, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. What are you thinking? The message, she said. My mother said I can interface with planetary networks, that I am a hub. She looked at the console. If I can access the central broadcast spire in the capital system, I can transmit this. I can show the galaxy the truth, not just the recording, but my memories, the torture, the slavery, the lie of the Harketh War. Jalen stood up, fear gripping his chest. The capital system? Sayalari. That's the heart of the Senate. It's the most fortified sector in the galaxy. It's suicide. We are already dead, she said, walking down the dais to stand before him. If we run, they will hunt us until one of us makes a mistake. We will live in the shadows, always looking back. Is that the life you want, Jalen? I want you alive, Jalen argued. We can go to the wild space and we can disappear. I cannot disappear, she said, touching his face. I am the last. If I hide, my people die with me. Their history becomes the lie the Senate wrote. She gripped his shoulders. Her strength was immense, undeniable. I have to go back. I have to break their narrative. Jalen looked into her eyes. He saw the resolve there. It was iron. There was no talking her out of it. She was a queen claiming her kingdom, not with a crown, but with the truth. We'll die, Jalen said, his voice breaking. You know that. Even if we get to the tower, we won't get out. Sayalari smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile. She leaned her forehead against his. Then we'll die with the truth, she whispered. But not in chains. Jalen closed his eyes. He thought of the boy in the warehouse. He thought of the families on Ethelgard. He thought of the years he had spent serving a lie. He opened his eyes. Okay. Okay? She asked. We go to the capital, Jalen said, taking her hand. But we do it my way. I know the security grid. I know the blind spots. If we're going to burn, let's make sure the fire can be seen from every star in the sky. Sayalari kissed him. It tasted of dust and glory. Together, she said. Together, Jalen replied. They turned and walked out of the throne room, leaving the shadows of the past behind. They walked toward the exit, toward the speeder, and toward the war that would end them both. The capital system of Prime Centauri was a monument to the Senate's vanity. It was a binary star system wrapped in a Dyson ring of orbital platforms, shipyards, and luxury habitats that glittered like diamond dust against the velvet black of space. At the center lay the planet Ethelos, a world completely encased in city sprawl, where the oceans had been drained to cool the subterranean fusion reactors and the sky was a permanent, smog-choked amber. To Jalen Voss, it looked like a target. He piloted the stolen speeder through the chaotic traffic lanes of the lower atmosphere. The vehicle was registered to a dead agricultural transport company, a ghost in the machine that would hold up to casual scans but crumble under a military-grade audit. Beside him sat Sayalari. She was unrecognizable. They had wrapped her in a hollow cloak, a shimmering mesh of light-bending fabric that projected the image of a generic logistics droid. It was a crude disguise, flickering at the edges whenever she moved too fast, but it was necessary. Beneath the cloak, her energy output was dampened by a jury-rigged suppression field Jalen had cannibalized from the speeder's engine core. It was uncomfortable for her. He could see the tension in her droid-projected shoulders, but it masked the thermonuclear signature of her heart. We are being scanned, Sayalari said. Her voice was modulated by the cloak to sound tinny and synthetic. I know, Jalen said, his eyes darting between the dashboard and the towering spires of the government district ahead. Keep your head down. We're just delivering produce to the Sector 4 district. There is a hunter here, she whispered. The synthetic modulation cracked, letting her true harmonic voice bleed through for a second. I can taste him. He smells like sterile rooms and cold electricity. Jalen's grip on the yoke tightened. The High Executor? Valeris, she named him. The man who peeled my skin back to see how the light worked. He is close. Jalen forced himself to breathe. Valeris was a legend in the Black Ops community, the Senate's favorite butcher. If Valeris was hunting them personally, they had minutes, not hours. We're almost to the drop, Jalen said. Stay focused on the mission. We get the codes, we get to the tower, we burn the truth into the sky. He banked the speeder toward a sleek, brutalist high-rise that jutted out of the smog like a spear. It was the private residence of Magistrate Kren, the Senate's vice director of communications. Kren was a corrupt, sweating grease stain of a man whom Jalen had saved from a cartel hit 3 years ago. Jalen held the evidence of Kren's embezzlement in a secure cloud server. Today, he was cashing in that favor. Jalen landed the speeder on a private balcony, bypassing the security grid with an override chip he had prepared days ago. The glass doors slid open. Kren was waiting. He sat in a hover chair, sipping iridescent wine, surrounded by exotic plants imported from worlds the Senate had likely burned. He looked up as Jalen entered, his face going slack with recognition and terror. "Voss," Kren stammered, spilling his wine. "You're dead. The report said you were vaporized in the rim." "Reports are often wrong," Jalen said, striding into the room. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't need to. The threat was written in his walk. "I need access, Kren. The central broadcast spire. Maintenance level or higher." Kren laughed nervously, wiping purple liquid from his silk tunic. "The spire? You're insane. The security there has been tripled since the rumors of the asset started circulating. Valeris has the place locked down." "I know," Jalen said. "That is why I need your clearance codes. Executive level." "I can't," Kren squeaked. "Valeris will fly me." "And if you don't," Jalen said, stopping directly in front of him, "I will release the files on the Tabana gas skimming operation. The Senate will execute you publicly for treason before dinner. At least with Valeris, you have a running start." Kren paled. He looked past Jalen to the logistics droid standing silently by the door. "What is that?" "My luggage," Jalen said. "The codes. Kren." Kren's shaking hands fumbled for a datapad. "You're killing me. Jalen, you're killing us both." "We're all dying," Jalen said, snatching the pad. "Some of us just want to choose how." He checked the data. It was good. Top-level biocodes for the maintenance lifts of the central spire. "Go," Kren whispered, pouring himself another drink with trembling hands. "Get out before I call the guards myself." Jalen turned to leave, but Sayalari didn't move. The droid projection flickered, revealing the glint of living steel beneath. She was staring at the wall, her head cocked. "He is here," she said. The balcony doors exploded inward. Jalen was thrown across the room by the concussion. He slammed into a marble planter, the breath driven from his lungs. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the whine of high-yield disruptors. Stormtroopers in the crimson armor of the Senate Guard rappelled from a stealth transport hovering above. They crashed through the glass, weapons raised, and behind them walked a man in white. High Executor Valeris was tall, gaunt, and terrifyingly pristine. He wore a long coat of white synth leather that seemed to repel the dust and debris of the explosion. His face was a mask of bored cruelty, his eyes augmented with spinning red apertures. 7 Alpha, Valeris purred, ignoring Kren, who was cowering behind his chair. "You have led me on quite the chase. The council is displeased with your unauthorized field trip." Sayalari dropped the disguise. The hollow cloak dissolved, revealing her true form. She stood tall, her steel skin gleaming under the room's chandeliers, the blue veins pulsing with an angry rhythm. She did not look afraid. She looked like a predator cornered. "Valeris," she said, her voice vibrating the glass on the floor. "Subdue her," Valeris ordered, waving a gloved hand. "Kill the human, and wipe the magistrate. He has served his purpose." The guards opened fire. Jalen rolled, drawing his blaster. He fired blindly, taking out the lead trooper with a shot to the throat. Kren screamed as a stray bolt vaporized his chest. Sayalari moved. She didn't attack the guards. She attacked the floor. She drove her fist into the marble, channeling a massive kinetic pulse. The floor of the penthouse shattered. The entire room tilted. Furniture, plants, and soldiers slid toward the crumbling edge. Jalen scrambled for purchase, grabbing a jagged piece of rebar jutting from the concrete. "Jump!" Sayalari yelled at him. She leaped into the hole she had created, falling to the level below. Jalen didn't hesitate. He let go and dropped into the dust and chaos. They landed in a maintenance corridor 1 floor down. Sayalari caught him, the impact denting the floor plates. "The lift," Jalen gasped, checking his datapad. "Kren's access point is down the hall, 50 meters. "Run," Sayalari commanded. They sprinted, behind them. Valeris floated down through the hole on a gravity disc, his coat billowing. He fired a wrist-mounted laser, the beam scorching the wall inches from Jalen's head. "You cannot run from your nature, 7 Alpha, Valeris taunted, his voice amplified. "You belong in the cage." They reached the maintenance lift. Jalen slammed the datapad against the reader. The light turned green. The doors hissed open. They threw themselves inside, and Jalen punched the override for the spire's summit. The doors slid shut just as a disruptor bolt slammed into the metal, leaving a glowing crater. The lift surged upward. It was a high-speed transit tube, designed to rocket maintenance crews to the top of the orbital antenna in seconds. The G-force pushed them down to the floor. Jalen lay on his back, gasping for air, sweat stinging his eyes. Sayalari knelt beside him. The suppression field on her speeder engine was gone. She was radiating heat, her internal reactor spiking from the adrenaline. "Are you hit?" she asked, her hands hovering over him. "I'm fine," Jalen lied, ignoring the shrapnel cut on his cheek. "We have maybe 3 minutes before this car reaches the summit. Valeris will have teams waiting." "Then we fight," Sayalari said. "I will clear the path. You get to the console." Jalen looked at her. The blue light in her veins was shifting, turning a violent, unstable violet. The stress was getting to her. She was teetering on the edge of another overload. "Sayalari," he said, reaching out to touch her face. The metal was hot, but he didn't pull away. "Listen to me, no matter what happens up there. Do not let them take you alive. You understand?" She froze. She looked at him, and the warrior's mask slipped. Underneath was the woman who had planted seeds on a moon, the woman who had cried in the vault. "I will not let them take you either," she whispered. The lift car shook as it passed through the atmospheric dampeners. The lights flickered. They were alone in the metal box, hurtling toward the sky. Sayalari leaned down. The space between them felt charged, electric. "Jalen," she said, her voice thick. "If we do not walk out of this—" "Don't say it," Jalen warned, his heart hammering. "I must," she insisted. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him up. Her eyes searched his, memorizing every line of his face, every scar. You showed me that I was not a thing. You gave me a name. You gave me a soul." "You always had a soul," Jalen said. She smiled, a tragic, beautiful expression that broke his heart. She kissed him. It was hard, fierce, desperate. It tasted of copper and blood and the ozone of the lift shaft. It was a kiss that tried to say everything they wouldn't have time to live. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his. "If this is our last moment," she whispered, "let it taste like defiance." The lift slowed. The G-force eased. The indicator light flashed. Summit access, broadcast deck. Jalen pulled his blaster. He checked the charge. Full. "Ready?" he asked. Sayalari stood up. Her skin hardened. The violet light intensified. She looked at the doors. "Let them come," she said. The doors opened. They didn't wait. They surged out together. The broadcast deck was a massive circular chamber dominated by a central pillar of pulsing light, the galactic transmitter. The walls were transparent steel, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the entire planet and the orbital rings beyond. It was waiting for them. A platoon of Senate guards stood in formation, shields raised. Behind them, flanking the console, were two heavy combat droids. And standing in front of the console was not Valeris, but someone Jalen recognized. It was General Halloway, his old commander. Jalen skidded to a halt, aiming his blaster. Sayalari took a defensive stance beside him, her hands glowing. "Halloway!" Jalen shouted. "Get out of the way!" Halloway looked tired. He held a heavy pulse rifle, but it was pointed at the floor. "I can't do that, Voss. The Senate has authorized full lethal force. Surrender the asset, and I can promise you a quick execution. It's the best deal you're going to get." "She is not an asset," Jalen roared. "She is a person, and she has something to say." "She is a malfunction," a cold voice sneered. Valeris stepped out from behind the central pillar. He had taken a separate, high-priority lift. He looked unruffled, smiling his shark-like smile. "Take them," Valeris ordered. The room erupted. The guards opened fire. Jalen dove behind a server bank, returning fire. He dropped two guards with precise shots to their helmet lenses. Sayalari did not hide. She screamed, a sound of pure power, and unleashed a wave of kinetic force. The front row of guards was blasted backward, their shields shattering. She charged the droids. It was a blur of violence. Sayalari moved faster than the droid's targeting sensors could track. She ripped the arm off one droid and used it to bludgeon the other. Sparks showered the room. She was a whirlwind of steel, dismantling the opposition piece by piece, but there were too many of them, and Valeris was watching, waiting. Jalen saw Valeris raise a distinct slender weapon, a neural disruptor rifle. It was designed to scramble synaptic pathways. It wouldn't kill Sayalari. It would shut her brain down, leaving the body intact for reclamation. Valeris took aim at Sayalari's exposed back as she wrestled a guard. "No!" Jalen screamed. He broke cover. He didn't think so. He didn't calculate. He just ran. He threw himself into the path of the beam just as Valeris pulled the trigger. The disruptor bolt hit Jalen in the chest. It wasn't a clean shot. The beam was meant for a Harketh physiology, heavily shielded and dense. On a human, it was catastrophic. Jalen felt his nervous system catch fire. Every nerve ending in his body exploded in white-hot agony. He was thrown backward, skidding across the polished floor. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't feel his legs. The firing stopped. The silence that followed was louder than the battle. Sayalari froze. She dropped the guard she was holding. She turned slowly. She saw Jalen lying on the floor, smoke rising from his chest. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, his body twitching with the aftershocks of the disruption. Jalen? She whispered. She walked toward him. The guards parted, terrified to intervene. Even Valeris lowered his weapon, watching with scientific curiosity. Sailari fell to her knees beside him. She reached out, her metal hands trembling uncontrollably. She touched his face. It was cold. The life was draining out of him, pulled away by the massive trauma to his system. Jalen, she said, her voice breaking. Look at me. Fix this, you fix things. Jalen's eyes drifted to hers. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled past his lips. He managed a weak smile. He tried to lift his hand to touch her cheek, but his arm wouldn't move. I see you, he mouthed silently. Not the weapon. Then his eyes went still. Sailari stared at him. She waited for the chest to rise. She waited for the snarky comment. She waited for the heartbeat she had listened to in the vault. There was nothing. Something inside Sailari snapped. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It wasn't the limiter. It was the final thread of restraint she had woven around herself to be worthy of him. She had held back her power because she was afraid of being a monster. She had tried to be human for him, but he was dead, and the humans had killed him. She threw her head back and screamed. It was not a human scream. It was the sound of a star dying. It shattered the glass of the server banks. It cracked the transparent walls. Limiters, disengaged, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a distorted harmonic chorus. She stood up. As she rose, she changed. The metal of her skin began to shift, flowing like mercury. She grew taller, her spine lengthening, her shoulders broadening. Plates of armor erupted from her skin, jagged and ornate. The violet light in her veins turned blinding white, then gold, then a terrifying absolute blue. A halo of hard light formed behind her head, a crown of energy. She was no longer Sailari the princess. She was the Harketh warform, the destroyer of worlds. Valeris took a step back, his composure shattering. Containment, full power, fire everything. The guards fired. A storm of plasma hit her. She didn't even raise a hand. The bolt struck her aura and dissolved. She turned her head toward Valeris. Her eyes were gone, replaced by burning wells of blue fire. You want the weapon? She spoke. Her voice sounded like a chorus of blades scraping against bone. It echoed inside their skulls. Witness! She swept her hand. A wave of blue fire erupted from her body. It didn't just knock the guards down. It disintegrated their weapons. It melted the droids into slag. The blast wave hit Valeris, lifting him off his feet and pinning him against the far wall. She walked toward the console. She stepped over the cowering guards. She didn't kill them. They were beneath her notice. She was not here for revenge anymore. Revenge was small. Revenge was human. She was here for the truth. She reached the central console. Holloway was there, clutching his rifle, shaking. He looked at the goddess of war towering over him. Move, she said. Holloway dropped his gun and ran. Sailari placed her hands on the interface. Warning, the computer droned. Unauthorized biometric signature. Access denied. I am not asking, Sailari said. She drove her hands into the machine. Her fingers pierced the metal casing, plunging into the optical circuitry beneath. She closed her eyes. She merged. She didn't just hack the system, she became the signal. She poured her consciousness into the transmitter array. She felt the spire amplify her. She felt the signal bounce to the orbital rings, then to the relay buoys, then to the hypercomms network. She was in the grid. She was everywhere, across the galaxy. Holoscreens were hijacked, in the Senate chambers, on the trade ships in the Rim, in the slums of Farok Station. The broadcast changed. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a video. It was a memory. 50 trillion beings suddenly gasped as they felt the cold of the cryo chamber. They felt the pain of the scalpel as Valeris peeled back skin. They felt the despair of the cage. They felt the loneliness of the dark. Then, they saw the history. Not the Senate's lies, but the truth. They saw the Harketh cities of glass and light. They saw the Senate fleet darkening the sun. They saw the betrayal at the peace conference. They saw the genocide. And then, they felt the love. They felt Jalen's hand on a metal cheek. They felt the warmth of the vault. They felt the hope of a bridge between stars. Sailari poured it all out. She emptied her soul into the galaxy. She stripped herself bare, showing them the monster they feared was just a woman who wanted to be free. In the broadcast room, Sailari's body was glowing so bright it was hard to look at. She was burning out. The interface was consuming her. "Look at what you did," she whispered to the stars. "Look at what you destroyed." The signal ended. Sailari pulled her hands from the ruined console. The blue fire in her eyes dimmed. Nom. The armor plates retracted, melting back into her skin. She shrank back down, the war form receding, leaving only the exhausted, broken woman. She turned around. The room was silent. The guards were on their knees, some weeping, some staring at their hands in horror. They had felt it. They had felt her pain. Valeris was slumped against the wall, his eyes wide, his mind shattered by the psychic feedback of the broadcast. He was drooling, mumbling about the light. Sailari ignored them all. She walked back to Jalen. She collapsed beside him. The silence of the room was heavy, pressing down on her. "I did it," she whispered to his still face. "I broke the chains, but I broke the world to do it." She laid her head on his chest, right over his silent heart. Outside the transparent walls, the city was changing. Lights were flickering. Sirens began to wail, not of police, but of riots. In the orbit above, ships were breaking formation. The lie had been punctured. The galaxy was waking up. But in the tower, Sailari felt only the cold. She closed her eyes, her hand gripping Jalen's jacket, and waited for the darkness to take her too. The silence in the broadcast deck was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden cessation of violence. Sailari knelt on the shattered floor tiles, her body forming a protective arch over Jalen Voss. The air around them still shimmered with the residual heat of her transformation. But the blinding light of the war form had receded, leaving her exhausted, her metal skin dull and gray, like iron left out in the rain. Jalen was not breathing. The disruptor bolt had scrambled the bioelectric rhythm of his heart, leaving his chest still and his eyes staring sightlessly at the vaulted ceiling. Sailari looked at his hands. They were scarred, calloused, the hands of a man who fixed things. He had tried to fix her. He had reached into the dark machinery of her existence and pulled out a soul. "You do not get to leave," Sailari whispered, her voice trembling. "I did not break the world just to watch you die in the wreckage." She placed her palms flat against his chest. Usually, her touch was cool, a property of the alloy she was made of. Now, she summoned the fire. She didn't call upon the destructive kinetic energy she had used to slaughter the guards. She reached deeper, into the core of her design, the Unity-class protocols her mother had spoken of. The bridge. She closed her eyes and visualized the spark of her own life force, the fusion of biological consciousness and nuclear durability. She visualized it as a thread of gold light. "Take it," she commanded. She pushed. A shockwave of energy left her body, not outward, but downward, into him. Her veins flared with agonizing intensity. It felt as though she were tearing pieces of her own spirit away, ripping the fabric of her existence to patch the holes in his. Jalen's body convulsed. His back arched off the floor, a guttural gasp tearing from his throat as his heart was kick-started by the raw surge of alien power. Sayalari didn't stop. She poured more into him, knitting the frayed nerve endings, cauterizing the internal bleeding with precise microscopic bursts of heat. She felt her own vision graying out. The alarms in her mind were screaming, system critical. Energy depletion is imminent. "If you fall, I fall," she gasped, her forehead resting against his sternum. "Live, Jalen, live." Jalen's eyes snapped open. He didn't see the room. He saw a blinding violet sun. He drew in a breath that sounded like a drowning man breaking the surface. "Sayalari," he croaked, his voice a ruin. Sayalari slumped back, catching herself on trembling arms. She looked drained, her skin ashen, the lights in her eyes dim. But she was smiling. It was a weak, broken smile, but it was there. "I told you," she whispered. "I am not just a weapon." Jalen tried to sit up, but pain hammered him back down. He was alive, but he was not whole. The disruptor had done damage that even she couldn't fully erase. His hands shook uncontrollably, and his legs felt like dead weight. "We have to move," Sayalari said, forcing herself to stand. She swayed, grabbing the console for support. The broadcast. It stunned them. But the shock will fade. Valeris will call for reinforcements. She looked around. The guards were still recovering, dazed by the psychic backlash of her transmission. Holloway was gone, vanished in the chaos. Valeris was sliding down the wall, trying to stand, his face a mask of incoherent rage. Sayalari didn't kill him. She didn't even look at him. He was a ghost of the past. She walked to Jalen and lifted him. It wasn't the effortless lift of the war form. It was a struggle. She was weak. "Lean on me," she said. Jalen draped his arm over her shoulders, gritting his teeth against the agony in his chest. "The lift is locked down," he wheezed. "We do not need a lift," Sayalari said. She walked them to the shattered window of the spire. The wind whipped at them, carrying the sounds of a city in turmoil. Below, fires were burning in the government district, not of war, but of riots. The people had seen the truth. The illusion of the Senate's benevolence had been incinerated in a single moment of shared memory. A maintenance skiff, automated and driverless, drifted near the spire, scanning for damage. Sayalari reached out with her mind, her interface still raw and open. She didn't hack it, she commanded it. The skiff veered sharply and docked at the broken window. They stumbled onto the deck. Sayalari hit the thrust, and they shot away from the spire, disappearing into the smoke and the neon haze of the lower levels. Behind them, the central broadcast tower stood like a tombstone over the grave of the old world. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and hyperspace jumps. They did not stay in one system for more than 24 hours. The galaxy was on fire. The broadcast had shattered the status quo. On 1,000 worlds, the populations were reacting. In the core systems, the Senate declared Sayalari a rogue biological terrorist and placed a bounty on her head so large it could have purchased a small star sector. They claimed the broadcast was a deep fake, a rebel propaganda hack designed to destabilize the peace. But in the Outer Rim, and on the worlds that had suffered under the Senate's boot, the narrative was different. They called her the Steel Messiah. They called her the Truth Bringer. Statues of the Senate leaders were toppled. Makeshift shrines appeared in cargo bays and spacer bars, depicting a woman of silver skin breaking chains. Jalen and Sayalari saw none of this. They were running too fast. Jalen's recovery was slow. The nerve damage was permanent. He walked with a cane now, a heavy rod of plasteel he had scavenged. His hands, once steady enough to solder a microchip in 0G, now had a persistent tremor. He was no longer the soldier he had been. He was scarred, inside and out, but he was alive. They pushed past the charted regions, past the trade routes, into the Veil, a region of nebula-choked space where navigation computers went to die. Sailari guided them. She said the stars spoke to her here, whispering of safe harbors. They found a moon orbiting a gas giant in the drift. It had no name, only a catalog number. It was breathable, lush with violet flora and rivers of pale glacial water. It was quiet. They landed the Vagabond in a valley shielded by high granite peaks. They powered down the reactor. For the first time in months, the hum of the engines died. "Is this it?" Jalen asked, leaning on his cane as he stood at the top of the ramp. The air smelled of pine and ozone. Sailari stood beside him. She had shed the armor, the cloaks, the disguises. She wore simple fatigues she had modified to fit her frame. Her skin had regained its luster, the blue veins pulsing with a calm, steady rhythm. "It is quiet," she said. "I think we can build here." They built a home not out of prefab shelters, but out of the land and the ship. They cannibalized parts of the Vagabond's hull to reinforce a cavern in the cliffside. Jalen rigged a hydroelectric generator in the river. Sailari used her strength to move stones that would have taken a crane to lift. It was hard work, and it was healing. Sailari began to plant. She found native seeds, hard-shelled pods that looked like stones, and coaxed them into life. She spent hours in the dirt, her metal hands surprisingly tender as she tilled the soil. One evening, 6 months after their arrival, Jalen sat on the porch they had built, watching the gas giant rise over the peaks. It was a massive, swirling eye of orange and storm gray. Sailari was in the garden, glowing faintly in the twilight. She stood up and walked to him, wiping soil from her hands. "They are growing," she said, pointing to the rows of sprouting violet vines. "The soil here is rich in iron. They like it. They take after their mother," Jalen teased gently. Sailari smiled. It was a real smile now, one that reached her eyes. "And how is the patient?" "The patient is tired," Jalen admitted, rubbing his aching leg. "But he's happy." She sat beside him, taking his hand. She didn't mind the tremor. She held it steady with her own unyielding grip. "We are far away, Jalen," she said softly. "But I can still feel the echo. The galaxy is changing. The war has not stopped." "I know," Jalen said. "But we did our part. We lit the fuse. Now we just have to let it burn." "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The fight?" Jalen looked at her. He looked at the woman who had saved him from a warehouse, who had carried him through the sky, who had poured her own life into his veins. "I miss nothing," he said. "I have everything right here." He stood up, groaning slightly with the effort. "Come with me. I have something to show you." He led her to the small workshop he had set up in the back of the cavern. It was hot, smelling of burning metal and flux. In the center was a small forge, not a high-tech plasma foundry, but an old-fashioned combustion forge he had built by hand. On the anvil sat an object covered in a cloth. "I didn't have credits for a ring," Jalen said, feeling a sudden uncharacteristic nervousness. "And even if I did, a diamond seemed fragile, useless." Sailari watched him, her head tilted. "You have been working here for weeks. I thought you were repairing the generator." "I was making this," Jalen said. He pulled the cloth away. It was a crown, but it was not the delicate jeweled filigree of a human royal. It was forged from the scrap hull of the vagabond and raw ore Jalen had mined from the valley. It was dark, gunmetal gray, reinforced with strips of the same silver alloy that Sayalari's skin was made of, shavings she had shed during her healing process. It was jagged, industrial, and beautiful. It looked like flames frozen in steel. "Jalen," Sayalari breathed. "You were a queen without a throne," Jalen said, picking it up. It was heavy. "You were a commander without an army, but you were never just a weapon. I wanted to make you something that fit, something that wouldn't break." He stepped closer to her. "I don't have a kingdom to offer you, Sayalari. I have a broken ship, a bad leg, and a bounty on my head that could buy a solar system. But I am asking you to stay, not as a refugee, not as a fugitive, as my partner." Sayalari reached out and touched the jagged spikes of the crown. "You made this with fire," she whispered. "And a hammer," Jalen added. "It was stubborn, like you." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. She lowered her head. "Put it on me," she commanded softly. Jalen placed the crown on her brow. It fit perfectly. The dark metal against her silver skin looked striking, archaic, and powerful. She looked like a queen of the old myths, a deity of the forge. She raised her head. Her violet eyes were shining. "A princess of steel needs nothing less," she said. She kissed him then, and it wasn't the kiss of a dying moment, nor the kiss of desperation. It was a kiss of promise. It was grounding. It felt like coming home. "I accept," she whispered against his lips. "But under one condition. Name it. You must build yourself one," she said. "I will not rule this garden alone." Jalen laughed. "I'm more of a mechanic than a king." "Then be the mechanic who keeps the world spinning," she said fiercely. They stood there in the warmth of the forge, two broken things that had found a way to fit together. For a moment, the war, the Senate, and the bounty hunters felt like a distant nightmare. Then, the alert chimed. It came from the ship's console in the main room, a sharp, rhythmic pinging that cut through the domestic silence like a knife. Jalen and Sayalari froze. They pulled apart, the soldier and the warrior instantly snapping back into focus. "Proximity alarm?" Jalen asked, reaching for his cane. "No," Sayalari said, her eyes narrowing. "That is a transmission, long range, subspace." They hurried to the console. Jalen punched up the display. Static filled the screen, followed by a stream of complex, cascading code. "It's encrypted," Jalen said, his fingers flying over the keys. "Coalition military cipher? No. This is older, much older." Sayalari stared at the code. Her hand went to her throat, where the limiter used to be. "I know this language," she whispered. "It is High Harketh, the royal cipher." "That's impossible," Jalen said. "You said you were the last." "I thought I was," she said. She reached out and touched the screen. The moment her finger made contact, the code unraveled. The static cleared. A voice cut through the speakers. It was not human. It was distorted, deep, booming like the shifting of tectonic plates. It spoke in a language Jalen didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a summons. "What is it saying?" Jalen asked, looking at Sayalari. Sayalari's face had gone pale. She gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles denting the metal. "It says, Designation 9 Omega. Awake." The signal was received. "The chains are broken. Coordinates enclosed." She looked at Jalen, her eyes wide with shock and a terrifying hope. 9 Omega, she repeated. "That is a heavy assault designation, a siege breaker class." "Another one?" Jalen asked. "Another war form," Sayalari said. "The signal I sent from the tower, it didn't just wake up the people, Jalen. It woke up the others, the ones the Senate buried, the ones they hid in the dark. She looked at the screen where a set of coordinates was pulsing. It was deep in the unknown regions, far beyond the Senate's reach. "I was never the only one," she whispered. The silence returned to the room, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence before a storm. Jalen looked at the garden outside, at the rows of seeds Sayalari had planted. He looked at the forge where he had made the crown. He looked at the life they had carved out of the rock. "If we answer," Jalen said quietly, "the quiet life is over. We'll be starting a war." Sayalari turned to him. She wore the crown of scrap metal and raw ore, and she had never looked more regal. "The war has already started, Jalen. We just paused to breathe." She walked over to the viewport, looking up at the stars. "My people are out there. They are waking up in the dark, confused, angry, alone. They need a voice. They need to know that they do not have to be monsters." She turned back to him. The choice hung in the air between them. They could stay. They could ignore the call. They could live in this valley until they were old and the metal of her skin finally rusted. Or they could finish what they started. "We can run," Sayalari said, her voice steady. "We can hide in this garden and pretend the galaxy isn't burning. Or," she held out her hand to him, "or we can lead." Jalen looked at her hand. He looked at his cane. He thought about the pain in his chest that never fully went away. He thought about the boy he had been on Ethelgard, following orders, burning families. He realized he was done hiding. He was done fixing broken things in the dark. It was time to build something new in the light. He took her hand. "Together," Jalen answered. They didn't pack. They didn't look back at the house or the forge. They walked out of the cavern and up the ramp of the Vagabond. Jalen sat in the pilot's seat. It was familiar, worn, shaped to his body. He began the pre-flight sequence. The reactor hummed to life, a deep, growling vibration that shook the dust from the hull. Sayalari sat in the co-pilot's seat. She reached up and adjusted the crown on her brow, then laid her hands on the interface. Her veins glowed blue, syncing with the ship. "Coordinates locked," she said. 9 Omega is waiting." "Let's go introduce ourselves," Jalen said. He punched the throttle. The Vagabond roared, lifting off the ground on pillars of blue fire. It soared up out of the valley, shattering the piece of the hidden moon. It punched through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of vapor like a scar across the sky. As they broke orbit and the stars stretched into the infinite lines of hyperspace, Jalen looked over at Sayalari. She was looking ahead, her chin raised, her eyes reflecting the starlight. She was no longer the girl in the cage. She was no longer the weapon in the vault. She was the queen of steel, and he was the mechanic who would keep her flying. They were lovers. They were revolutionaries. And as the ship vanished into the void, carrying them toward the waking giants in the dark, they were the only hope a broken galaxy had left. Fade to starlight.